Michelle. I thought I was going to be able to do this video in one take, but this is actually my third or fourth take. But this is going to be my last take because I want this to be like a conversation that we're having. And I made a couple notes on the guided questions because I need to collect my thoughts sometimes. Yeah, I'm recording here, and I acknowledge that I am an uninvited settler on the lands of the Sinaiaks, the Silks, and the Tanaha, and the Shwepnik people. Those lands were stolen, and it's very important to recognize that and educate others on the importance of land acknowledgements. And my hope is that going forward with every presentation and every public speaking event that I encounter, that I remember and recognize to always do a land acknowledgement, because they are incredibly important. And I think that, people don't see that as much as they should. And then also like people throwing around land acknowledgements without fully understanding their meaning, I think, so just like, that's kind of one of my goals right now, is to just continue to do land acknowledgements and acknowledge that I'm here on these beautiful lands of all of these people who have been colonialized and forgotten about. Colonialized and not forgotten about, because we continue every day to make meaningful recognitions of their presence, if that makes sense. So yeah, good morning. I made some bread today, or I'm in the process of making bread. And while I was making bread, I was thinking about doing my video. And then I was sitting here writing my notes, and I was like, you know what? Making a loaf is kind of, in a way, like treatment of people. And what I mean by that is that if I was to throw all my ingredients into the bowl and leave it, nothing would happen, right? No nourishment of relationship, no kneading, no mixing, nothing would happen. It would just sit there and probably get really gross. Now, if I were to mix it, do my initial mix and leave it, and then bake it, it would turn into a loaf. But I wouldn't get a very big loaf. And so minimal effort is not going to get you the relationship / the accomplishment that you want. And I think that's also important, because the more work I put into my bread, the better it comes out. But on the contrary, and sorry if this doesn't seem relevant, but on the contrary, if I put in too much work, then my bread will come out flat. And so that's interesting, because I think it's like, the way that I was thinking about it this morning is just that, like, when you put in the right amount of work to a relationship, then that relationship will give back. In this case, when I put in the right amount of work to my projects, to my bread, then what I get back is a nice loaf. And I think that means a lot in terms of building relationships and keeping relationships, and also like educating people. If you're understanding my analogy, I hope you are. Anyways, so the first question is about, how do I know what I know about Indigenous peoples and Indigenous ways of knowing? And this question, I think, is really important because it allows reflection kind of what we've done for learning, and also like what kind of learning we had coming into this. So I think, how do you know what you know kind of depends on like where you are in the world, and also like where you're at with yourself. The more I learned in your class, the more appreciation I was able to have for like the things around me and the people around me, and also like being outside. And I find myself now, you know, when I was younger, I used to find myself all the time being outside and enjoying nature and enjoying the animals. And lately I felt myself being grounded and reconnected with that part of me. And I want to thank you for that, because I think that reconnection to myself is kind of like that reconnection to my culture and to where I came from. And so I find myself every morning I wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and I go outside and I let my dog out, and I just take deep breaths outside, and I listen to the owls. I have 2 or 3 owls in my neighborhood, and they're talking all morning, but they're talking before the sun comes up, right? So then I get home from the gym, and this is around 6 in the morning that I get home, and the sky is just like that tinge of blue during like dawn. You know, the sun isn't up, but you could tell that the light is coming through, right? And the owls aren't talking anymore. The owls are sleeping. And now I get my morning birds, and I get my chickadees, and I get, you know, I don't know what the other birds are in my neighborhood, but they are my morning birds. And there's a lot of them. And I can hear them right now. It's, I don't know, I think 9 in the morning. Yeah, it's 9 in the morning, and my morning birds are singing all morning, and I hear them when I'm in my house, and I hear them when I'm outside. And just recognizing these birds and recognizing their part in nature and seeing them reminds me of the way that I can't control everything, and reminds me of like my place in the world, and also my responsibility to the earth and my responsibility to my home. And it makes me think of, you know, my responsibility to leave things as they are, and my responsibility to give back to the earth that gives to me. And so when I think about what I know about Indigenous peoples and their ways of knowing, I just think about what it means to me to be a part of something that's bigger than myself. So like, for example, the world. I'm a part of the world, and it's loaded, right? Because we're all a part of the world, and the way that we treat it is a reflection of who we are, I think. And the way that it's being treated right now, and the way it's been treated for the last 100 years, is really upsetting. Because one day the earth is not going to be so forgiving to us, I think. And that's really sad. So I think the more that we can appreciate the earth that we have, and the more time we can spend outside being with the earth and laying in the grass and putting our feet in the soil, is just like the more time we can be grounded. I also understand that my learning is limited because I've spent a lot of time in colonial systems. I'm in a colonial system every day when I show up to Selkirk College, every day when I showed up to Stanley Humphreys, every day when I showed up to Brent Kennedy in elementary school. It's all colonial systems. You know, we hardly ever sat in circles. We were in rows, or we were in groups. Put up your hand if you want to go to the bathroom. Be quiet, sit still, don't talk. You know, my learning is limited, and I understand that. But I also know that my learning is real. And the things that I know now versus the things that I knew back then is just like incredibly different. And I think the amount of growth in myself and my person and who I am, I think is just incredibly wonderful. So I appreciate this question. Thank you. My 3 key points of learning in this class. I did some learning in this class. I think there was a lot of learning that happened at the beginning of the class in the first 5 or 6 weeks that I knew a lot about. So a lot of my learning in the first 5 or 6 weeks came from my classmates, and it came from their reflections, especially in the class discussions, and just the way that people can articulate themselves about the learning that they're doing in the circle and in the discussion is just incredible. And I think having that connection with people is one of the most important ways to learn. I also learned a lot from my classmates' presentations, specifically the first one about the water. That one with the example of the nation that was, on the island and just like very secluded, and then they had the water buckets coming and no way to recycle them. That really like struck me hard, because it just like goes back to like the way that we treat the world, and the way that we're treating the earth is just like horrible with our pollution. Also, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Two-Spirit presentation struck me very hard. I am ashamed to admit that I didn't know as much as I wish I knew about the horrible injustices that those women have faced. It's incredibly significant, and it should be treated as such, and it's not. So I just really appreciated the way that they had their presentation, and the way that they carried their grief through that presentation was incredibly powerful. And I was in absolute tears in their presentation. I was in tears. Because, it could have been me. And it wasn't, but it was other girls. It was children on the side of the road with no clothes. And that is utterly, utterly disappointing and so disgusting. I thought it was also incredibly powerful learning from real stories like that. Another example of a story that I learned from was Brian Sinclair. And God, his mistreatment in the system was just unbelievable. Unbelievable. He had a treatable UTI. He sat there for a day and a half and he died. Nobody helped him. It just shows me the kind of systematic racism that are in these systems that I want to work in. It's terrible. It's unjustifiable, and it needs to be recognized so that we can learn. But it's like, how much more learning can we do? How many more people need to die before we learn that the systematic racism against Indigenous people in the systems need to change? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it should be obvious. Somebody needs help, you help them. Doesn't matter how busy it gets in there. You check in on every single person in that waiting room. I will carry this learning forward in so many different ways, Like, actively, I think about every day how I can create culturally safe places and how I can be a culturally safe person for others. I want to be like advocating for these people, and I want to educate people on the injustices that are faced by Indigenous people every single day, and the things that happened 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I was 11. That's not that long ago. 20 years ago is not that long ago. 50 years ago is not that long ago. This is still current, and people don't see that, and I think educating and advocating is the most important way that I can take this learning moving forward. Through actions, I will treat people the way I want to be treated. And the reason that that's important is because it's so simple. It's so simple because I want to be treated with care, and I want to be treated like every other person in the room. And I wasn't growing up. I mean, I'm brown. I am brown. You know, I'm Indigenous, and I'm Spanish, and that made people treat me differently. So treating people differently is not something I'm interested in, you know? I just want everybody to be treated fairly and equally. Thank you so much for listening to my video. I am about a minute over time. I'm sorry about that. It was definitely my bread analogy. Thank you for all the learning that we did in this class, Michelle. And I am so thankful to have had you as my teacher. And I'm so thankful for all the stories you shared. Have a wonderful weekend.